All right, welcome to the first edition of the Blue Review. I am Greg Bergman. That is Clinton Yates over there, and he's actually in New York right now. Hopefully soon we'll be getting him right next to me in the chair and have the same background. The first question I got for you, Clinton, is this. You're on the Around the Horn all the time, and underneath your name, it always says ESPN LA, which is very cool. At what point are you going to change it from ESPN LA to Blue Review?
That's probably going to be never, if for no other reason than we don't talk about baseball enough on that show. Pretty much when I'm on is when baseball is discussed, which I love, but that's why I'm happy to be here. It's going to be fun to do this pretty much all season in terms of the Dodgers, because I think it is a somewhat critical year for this group of guys in terms of what is happening with this blue team. So, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. So let's just get right into it then. Here's the thing that I'm starting off with. Now, when it comes to spring training, and there's just two different types of ways that people think about this. How much does spring training actually mean to how you're going to do in the regular season? Like James Outman is batting 300 and he was doing really well. He had a home run last night on Sunday, and he's still really starting to show who he's going to be coming into the regular season. Does that transfer over into the regular season for you?
I think the biggest thing that spring training does is it allows guys who might not otherwise be familiar with teammates to become part of the squad. You know, the batting, the pitching, that's all sort of individual to each guy. But that's why this is a very specifically important spring training. Let's not forget the WBC was in the middle. Guys were kind of all over the place in terms of whom they were with, be it Mookie, be it Freddie, you know. And so whatever gel concept you thought you might have been able to have with spring training, I don't necessarily think was the same. That said, I don't know that that's a bad thing. You've got veterans on this team. You've got guys that have been around, been through plenty of spring trainings in terms of their ability to ramp up. And quite honestly, I think that the WBC is probably better for a lot of guys in terms of getting their actual reps than whatever it would be to play a game in 2 innings in the morning and then go golf for the rest of the day. So I don't see it being a big problem for the Dodgers, but I do think it's more of a team thing than it is an individual thing when it comes to production or even wins and losses, you know, overall.
So actually, I mean, I agree with you for the most part. I think this Dodger team is a little bit different in the sense that they've been together for so long. And most of the guys that are on that team, there's some younger guys that are coming up, like, you know, the Vargas and Rojas is coming over, although he was here before, and Outman and those types of guys that are all up here. But for the most part, these guys know each other and they've been playing with each other for, you know, almost 10 years now, some a little bit shorter, some a little bit longer, but they've all been together. So I feel like that situation is not going to hurt this team specifically just because of that.
Well, maybe, but they've lost a lot of guys too that were part of that. I mean, there's an outside belief that, you know, they don't have as many guys as they used to in terms of those born and bred Dodgers. And just the two guys I mentioned alone are part of that. And so I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. That's what this Dodgers team does well. But if there was going to be a problem, I don't think it's going to have anything to do with spring training at all.
No, I totally agree with that. So let's move on over to the Julio Uria. So he's getting the nod for the starting pitcher on opening day, which good for him. He absolutely deserves it. But there's a little bit of sense that's going around here that he might not be back at the end of this year because he's a Scott Boras client. The Dodgers have kind of let him kind of stew with what he's been doing. He doesn't, after the World Series win, you couldn't find his gear online, that people were having a tough time finding his gear. He's been secondary to Kershaw, rightfully so, but he's been secondary to Kershaw. He's been secondary to Buehler. He was secondary to Scherzer. Everybody that's come in, he's kind of been pushed aside. And so now that he's finally the opening day starter, which is great for him, I mean, do you think that this guy is going to be around here next year? Do you think this helps in that sense, or is it just it's kind of done at this point?
Well, first of all, you know how I feel about speculating on guys for seasons down the line when we still have
he's a free agent.
So when we still have seasons to play. So I would tell you, Dodgers fans, let's enjoy this season first, because you never know what happens that could influence the decision at the end of the season. You got to play the games for a reason. That being said, I do think that there is some interesting historical precedents here with the Dodgers. They retired Fernando Valenzuela's number for finally, you know what I'm saying, in terms of the Mexican community that is the lifeblood of this Dodgers team in terms of fan. And obviously that means Urias' appearance opening day is going to be a big one for a lot of people. So there was some housekeeping that kind of needed to be done, that was done, that I think kind of led to this being sort of a no-brainer decision. I think he's actually still got a reasonable amount to prove in this regard. Being the number one is very different on a major league staff than being the number three. Personally, it doesn't mean you don't have the same stuff. It just means that what you're looked at as from that pitching staff standpoint is just a little different in terms of expectations. That said, he arguably could have been the number one pitcher for a couple seasons now. You know what I'm saying? Like overall. So it's technically just a shift, but I love this for him. And I think that him throwing at home is just an environment that if you don't like the Dodgers, well, then what are you even doing? Like, because those are going to be the best games of this Dodger season. It's Urias on the mound at home at Dodger Stadium. I can't wait to see it. I think it's a no-brainer pick for the Dodgers overall.
Yeah, no, I really hope that he's going to stick around because he's a huge part of it. He, like you said, he's been the best Dodger pitcher for the last 3 years. So, I mean, we can get into pitching stats if that's what you're looking at.
Let's get to that because I think there are 3 things overall that are the most important for this Dodgers team going into the 2023 season. And we'll start right there. The pitching staff. Urias moving up from 3 to 1 is a great indicator for him, but it's also an indication of what's happened to the rest of the staff over the last 2 seasons. Not nearly the same sort of confidence, I believe, in your 1 through 4 that you had going into other seasons, which doesn't mean that that's a problem. It's just a slightly different look. Kershaw, not the guy that he once was. Buehler, not there. Gonsolin had the season of his life in the first half of the last season, and then that kind of faded. And the big question for me is Dustin May. I think if Dustin May can't be 100% and arguably a 2 that's close to 1 because he's got great stuff, then this season takes a very different look because you got 1 and then 3 sort of possibles after that. That's tough for me, at least in terms of what you're used to as a Dodger fan. I don't know what you think, Greg, but Dustin May is a big part of what this season can be for the Dodgers.
I know I'm totally in agreement with you. Dustin May, to me, is a very big linchpin to this whole thing. But I got to push back a little bit. I actually love this pitching staff. There's question marks. I totally agree with you on that. There are question marks. But Kershaw, I think, is still Kershaw. He still is going to have, he'll go 20 starts, 22 starts, somewhere right around there. He's going to have some time breaking down a little bit, whatever it happens to be, just sitting on the IL because that's what he does. But he's still going to be the same pitcher that he's been. He's going to go. He'll pitch 5-6 innings. He's still going to have a right around a 3 ERA. He'll get you 10 to 12 to 14 wins. That's kind of who he is at this point. I think he's still going to be the same guy as the number 2 starter. I think Urias is really going to show out this year. And Dustin May, I think, has possibly the best stuff in all of baseball. I think he can be as good or better than a Jacob deGrom. I think he can be right up there with Verlander as long as he just holds on to that stuff and really shows it and has control over it. So he needs to show it. I totally agree with that. He needs to show that he's back to the guy he was after Tommy John. But if he doesn't, then this whole prediction goes to hell. But otherwise, I think, I think it's still, he has the ability to do it. And Tony Gonsolin's going to come off. I think I have a high hopes for Noah Syndergaard. If he gives me 10 wins and like a 3.5 or 4 ERA, I'm happy with that. And Ryan Pepio, Michael Grove, or Gavin Stone, whoever gets to be in that 5th spot for the most of the season, going to be just fine.
I like Pepio, but those are questions that you're asking. I mean, Kershaw, the problem is not the stuff. The problem is not whether or not we think he can do it. The problem is availability. And if you get into a question of maybe sometime the availability with Kershaw, don't really know what you're going to get out of some other guys. At a certain point, the wins, that total keeps going down from expected wins. And so that's my concern is that this is getting later and later in his career. There's a reason he's signing 1-year deals now. It's not anything against Kersh. It's just like, hey, you know what I mean? You don't necessarily know a guy who's put that much work in, who's done that well for that long. It does break down. And that's not something I would want to have to rely on. It kind of feels like a bonus. Now, my second thing is on the infield at the shortstop position. As a secondary corollary point, all of you people who are whining about how various players got injured in the World Baseball Classic, people get injured in spring training all the time. Nobody is stopping spring training games. Am I wrong?
Well, no. So the only thing I have to say there is just the only thing that upset me about it, and I'm not upset. I understand. Go play in the WBC. That's fine. It happened in the WBC. It didn't happen in the spring training game. So because it happened in something that doesn't count towards your team, that's the only thing that's kind of upsetting. Like if Freddie Freeman didn't get hurt, he's fine. Thankfully, the hamstring is fine. But if he actually got hurt in the WBC, I'd be a little bit more upset than if he got hurt with a hamstring in a spring training game.
Okay,
because you're playing for the team.
I guess, but they're spring training games, bro. Those don't actually count either.
Sure. And look, Gavin Lux got hurt too. Okay.
Right.
So
this is where the point is that I'm getting to. Gavin Lux gets hurt, and this hurts my heart for a lot of reasons. That guy worked really hard to get to this point, to come back to be the starter, and to have him blow it out that early, I think is a bit of a morale punch to a lot of this team. And, we've said before that the leader of this team sort of obviously is Clayton Kershaw from a visual standpoint, face of the franchise. Freeman is obviously there at first base, and Mookie is obviously one of the bigger stars in the game. But Gavin Lux kind of represented something that I think that really was important to this team in terms of the homegrown element we've talked about. Chris Taylor is kind of a different guy than he was, but the shortstop position is a question mark in a lot of ways that I don't think is necessarily going to be that difficult to solve, because you can insert other guys, but you just don't have Gavin. And I was really looking for a breakout year from him. And that to me is a real loss from a fan standpoint to this Dodgers 2023 run.
It's a huge loss. And I've never been a big Gavin Lux guy. He kind of proved me wrong last year by actually being consistent until he got hurt. But I'll just say this year, with no shift, Miguel Rojas being as your everyday shortstop, being a strictly defensive guy, he's going to get you some hits here and there, but being a defensive guy on a team with where there's not a shift, the Dodgers were the team that actually benefited from the most from the shift last year. So having a defensive guy there is a huge, huge deal. Being able to have somebody, Gavin Lux is not a good defensive player in general, wherever he plays, outfield, shortstop, second base, he was bad at all of it. But having a guy that's going to be an everyday shortstop, and yes, you can move other guys in, I think this year specifically is a good spot to have somebody like Rojas who can have that left side of the infield pretty much, covered. It's a big deal.
The no shift is a big factor. I think Gavin had room to improve and prove you wrong yet again on the diamond, but that's just me. Now, the last thing, and I think this is arguably the most important one, because none of this happens in a vacuum. You still got to play the games, and the other people are trying to win too, is the division. Last season ended, I know people don't like to talk about this, but with the Dodgers getting their can slammed by the Padres. It was a series that they did not look like they were in at all, in my personal opinion. And the Padres have gotten better, and other teams in the NL have gotten better. The competition is stiffer. And I don't necessarily know that means that the Dodgers can't step up to it. That's not what I'm getting at. But you just don't know what you're going to get out of some of these other retooled teams. The Dodgers, as you mentioned, are probably the most consistent of all of those squads that have been in the competition in the NL for a while. But other teams got hope. And I'm very interested to see how some of these squads look at this LA team from a competitive standpoint. Are they considered the favorites in their opponents' minds? Just in general, where does that stand? Because the way that the season ended last year, it did not appear that the San Diego Padres had any fear whatsoever of the Dodgers.
No, they didn't, which was, and they showed it in postseason. They did it for everybody until they got to the Phillies. But either way, yeah, I mean, look, they are a good team. They completely retooled over the year. They're going to be a very, very good, strong team. The only thing that worries me a little bit is that they're always been the underdog that had to overcome the giant of the Dodgers. Yeah. And now they are supposedly the Giants. And when teams that are that big team that are expected to win the division, that's a lot of pressure that goes on to you. So can they sustain through all of that? Yes or no, it depends on, we'll see what's going to happen. But for the most part, I think they're going to struggle with that a little bit. They're not used to being the top dog, whereas the Dodgers always have. And because they're going to go out there and they're going to play their game and they're going to be consistent. They're still going to get 90 to 95 wins because they're that good of a team, make the playoffs, and it's not going to be that much big of a deal. I really do wonder how much the Padres suffer from that disease of me that, Pat Riley always likes to talk about.
No, it's a good question, but I think there's also the very real thing of, if you put down blind resumes of both teams, one might just say the Padres are a better team on paper. That is within realm of the conversation. And that's where, forget about the expectations, the talent might be a thing. And that's just something that the Dodgers aren't really used to, is not actually perhaps being the most talented team on paper. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think that makes for good, because the way the season ended last year for the Blue was not great. I did not love that. Body language was awful, and it ended the season. So hopefully this year, hope springs eternal a little bit more. The WBC provided a little bit of a spark for some of those guys that are bigger stars on that team. And, we'll see how it goes first month of the season.
I hope so. All right. So this is what you're going to get every day on the Blue Review. We're going to do this 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. It's always going to be right here on the YouTube, and you're going to be able to see it or hear it on the ESPN LA app.
And I promise I'll be in a better place tomorrow than a hotel room in New York. I promise.
All right, you're gonna have a background like this one day. Don't worry.
Yeah,
You'll
one
be
day.
all
One
in.
day.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow on the Blue Review.